here in Go Elite, we understand that majority of the audiences that we work with are F-1 students, and then this incident raised a lot of concerns for a lot of us, even though if you're not involved with everything that's going on or has happened, you might wonder what happened, what exactly caused this, and what is the now trends with the SEVIS termination cases. So today, we brought together two of the experts in the field, two immigration attorneys who are involved in some of the cases, of either consulted some of the students or actually defended some of the students. And then we want to specifically take into the timelines of what is going on, what happened, and what will be the future with the SEVIS termination cases. And you guys can feel free to send in questions in the Q&A chat. We wanted to make it as interactive as possible, so less presentations, more of us discussing. So we would love to hear from student concerns, students' questions. And then I wanted to give a brief introduction of today's guests, today's speakers. David is an experienced immigration attorney from the East Coast, and then he is the director of a law firm, and then he is closely involved with a lot of the big immigration conferences or journal reports. So he's been actively giving legal advice previously with those SEVIS termination cases. And then another guest we have today is immigration Marta Meng. You guys also might have seen our previous webinars with David or with Marta. Marta is located in Los Angeles. She was also representing LA students in terms of the SEVIS termination cases. So definitely we were gonna have a discussion based on that. So, all right. I guess I will let David start with probably just a little bit introduction of who you are, and you can give us like a recap of what was going on, what was the storyline of the SEVIS terminations.
All right. Well, thanks, Ryan. Well, geez, what a few weeks it's been, right? I mean, this is a late-breaking seminar, and this is certainly a little different information than we were going to provide even a week ago. So things have really, really moved quickly and thankfully very positively. So like Ryan said, I'm David Gluckman. I'm an immigration attorney. I practice nationwide. I mean, I'm headquartered on the East Coast, but I represent clients from all kinds of all states, all institutions, and I've spoken at lots of conferences, and I've been advising lots of students who have been involved in this SEVIS termination issue. So we've done a lot of consultation about like, what does that mean? What does it mean for me? Am I out of status? Should I sue? Should I pursue reinstatement? So all those types of things. So we are intimately aware of the timeline. So I'll sort of just give you a brief overview of what's been going on. So we'll back up to March 28th. So started happening a little earlier than that, where there were some students that were sort of focused on because of some campus protest issues, and they were made examples of. And we probably thought, oh, okay, well, that's not that big of a deal because I wasn't involved in any campus protests. So, that's too bad for them. I'm just going to keep on studying, keep on with my OPT, and everything's going to be fine. Well, not less than a week later, starting on March 28th and running about through April 10th, all of a sudden, people's records were mass terminated in SEVIS. And this was very discomforting for several reasons. Number one, the students never received any direct notification from SEVIS. The only way you found out about it is from your campus advisor, your DSO, who advised you, hey, your status is terminated. And then you got a scary email about, okay, well, that means you got to stop working. You might have to leave the US. So there are all those things. And then not only that, but you were also, during that same time frame, as you can see in the next arrow, is people were also getting emails from consular posts saying your visa is also revoked. So that's sort of a 1-2 punch. So not only was your SEVIS record terminated, but your visa was revoked. So in the course of litigation, we found out that this was probably about 5,000 students nationwide who were affected. So this is a massive event, and we'll talk about what precipitated this in a few minutes, but it looked like just given some of the reasons that for the SEVIS termination, everything was saying, you were found in a criminal records database. It looked like they just used some very crude AI to go through the records of the National Criminal Database to see if there was anybody who'd ever had any encounter with law enforcement. It doesn't matter what that encounter was, whether it was an arrest, whether it was a conviction, whether sometimes it was somebody who was the victim of something. Anybody who had any type of fingerprint in the fingerprint database was being terminated. So that was really, really shocking to a lot of people. So then what happened was the community rallied around it. Okay. So it was a really rapid response that was done in partnership between the students and a lot of litigators. So a lot of attorneys around the country then started filing federal lawsuits saying, well, this is totally unfair for a number of reasons. Number one, we weren't given any chance to weigh in before our record was terminated because we could have clearly said, this was a speeding ticket. Okay, that had nothing to do with my ability to remain in the United States. That should have easily been something that did not affect my status. And there was also, okay, well, does SEVIS even have the authority? Does ICE even have the authority to terminate records in SEVIS? And even if they did, were these valid reasons for terminations? There were all types of legal errors that were pointed out in this litigation. So there are probably more than 50 lawsuits that were brought in federal courts, and the vast majority, I think more than 95%, actually resolved in favor of the student against the government because the government was making very dubious arguments, sometimes even saying, oh, well, so what? You were terminated in SEVIS. That really doesn't mean anything for your status, which is contrary to everything that everybody has ever been told over the last 20 years. So they were losing left and right. And finally, what happened starting last Thursday night and going into today is the government saw the writing on the wall and they said, well, this is a loser. We're losing every single case. It's taking an unbelievable amount of resources because every single one of these lawsuits was filed as an emergency. So then they had to have emergency hearings. They had to drop everything else that they were working on and go to court, and they were losing. So, they said, okay, we're going to sort of go give up. We're going to agree to reactivate all these records, even for people who weren't involved in litigation. And so where we are today is that I believe the vast majority of people who were affected by these initial terminations are seeing their records reactivated in SEVIS. And now the only questions that remain are, well, where are we now? Is everything good? Like, is this as though it never happened? And what, if anything, is ICE going to do? Are they going to do something else? Because they said that they are formulating a new policy on SEVIS terminations. We'll have to stay tuned on that. But as of today, it's thankfully moved in a very positive direction from even where we were last week. And hopefully this will be thoroughly resolved and we'll have additional clarity in the weeks to come.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Before we move on to the next session, I do want to ask both of you guys, as attorneys, you guys probably see a lot of real cases with students. Are all of the cases that students have their CVs terminated, did they have, for example, did they have convictions? Did all of them have convictions, or some of them are just speeding ticket where it got resolved or dismissed?
Almost none of
You want to
the
go?
ones, yeah, almost none of the ones that I dealt with had any conviction at all. Most of them were just arrests. And even if there were charges, people would go into programs like community service and ultimately their charges would be dismissed. So we're not talking about people who have even convictions for things. I mean, technically, if you pay a speeding ticket, you're convicted, but that's absolutely meaningless. So in some of these cases, there weren't even people who were charged with anything at all.
Yeah, from the cases I have seen, same, I would say the majority of them don't have convictions at all. They may have arrest record, they may even have not ever been charged at all. So not everyone, definitely not everyone has convictions in those civil termination cases.
Mhm. And then just a follow-up questions. I'm representing the audiences in our rooms that are not that familiar with the legal terms. For example, some of us might have speeding tickets or other kind of violations before. What if we go to court, we dispute that speeding ticket? Did some of those people also were affected? For example, that speeding violation wasn't actually confirmed, or they didn't pay the ticket, but they
Yeah.
were disputing that.
Yeah, anybody who is arrested or charged. So that's what's so un-American about all this. I mean, you're taught, anybody who's learned about American history or the Constitution is basically you're innocent until proven guilty, right? And that you're entitled to a defense. Well, these people were either not even charged, they were just fingerprinted, or when they were charged, the cases were dismissed. So you were basically targeting people who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, had didn't done nothing wrong, and that the courts had ruled that they did nothing wrong, and that still was used because of the crude AI techniques that they were using to cull out these records. They were facing potentially the most serious consequences of all from immigration when the criminal justice system said they did nothing wrong. So it was completely backwards.
Yeah, to add to this, I know a lot of the students are asking why, right? They want to find out why the termination happened so that they can avoid it. But at this point, from what I have heard, I don't think the government gave out a very clear reason why they did that. They might have something, planned, but it could be, something got out of hand when they were running the AI. That can be one of the reasons. So they didn't give out the why yet, but I guess we won't know the why because they decide to restore all the students' status for the time being until they have some policy developed later.
Mhm.
Well, also to pick up on that, we might actually find out a little bit more background about what happened because a lot of the lawyers I'm talking to are refusing to dismiss these cases because they're saying that does just because they've agreed to reactivate somebody's SEVIS status, that doesn't stop the government from taking any other illegal action, especially with respect to this new policy that's coming out. So a lot of attorneys are saying, okay, great. Well, I'm so happy that you finally seen the light, but we want to press forward and get some what's called discovery, which is basically the information that you get, the evidence about what the government did. So this is my, asking questions of witnesses, getting documents from internally in the government, all that kind of stuff. So if that's allowed to proceed, then we will likely find out some more information. But just given the timeline, it's probably going to be several months from now. And maybe by that time, we'll be on to another battle, given how this administration's been operating.
Mhm. And then to your last point, David, you mentioned that possibly there's new policies that is being shaped. Could you share a little bit more about what that would be?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it was because these government lawyers were absolutely getting embarrassed in court because they couldn't even explain what what SEVIS was and what a termination was. So I think that was because there had been never any policy that had come out to treat the SEVIS record as basically nothing. So they were basically going to court and be like, "What's the big deal? What's the big emergency? So your SEVIS record's terminated. That doesn't mean anything." And the students were submitting these affidavits saying, well, that's funny because I can't work on campus. I can't work off campus. I can't even remain enrolled in school. I'm being told that I'm violating status. I'm worried that ICE is going to come pick me up anytime now. So they're going to probably formulate some policy about what it means with respect to a SEVIS termination and the relationship to what that does to your F-1 status. But in terms of giving them additional reasons to terminate or not to terminate, I don't think they have very much wiggle room because it's very clear in the regulations that number one, ICE, which is the government agency that's responsible for SEVIS, does not really have much authority to do anything to a SEVIS record. And number two, the limited instances that are actually spelled out in the regulations that gives them the opportunity to act, so such as publishing something in the Federal Register, which they're not going to be doing, a private bill, which is basically a special bill that a senator or a congressperson puts in front of Congress with respect to a certain one individual. That's not going to happen. All these things that are very clearly spelled out in the regulations that sort of limit their power. I don't know that any policy is going to be able to undo that they're going to be coming up with in the context of litigation, but we'll see. And if they do something illegal, then guess what? We have a whole team of litigators that have already been doing these SEVIS cases, and we'll just move on to the next chapter and sue them on that.
Right. Just to clarify, I just wanted to repeat everything you said to make sure our student understand what that was. So basically, the new policies might be taking shape because they wanted to have more justification into what they were doing. Even though they dismiss some of the cases, they reverse some of the cases, but still, if they wanted to legitimate some of the actions they did, they had to have a new policy, and they're gonna stick with that new policy in the future.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Unless we sue them and we stop it again. So, which is very possible.
And then to also, I wanted to ask both of you guys to your last points. I understand that last week we heard the big news that the US government are reversing majority of the cases. So students at one point were terminated with their SEVIS record, got their SEVIS record back, which was a tremendously great news. But moving on in the future, do you guys think this could be something that will happen again, or I know this is quite early for the students, but I think this is probably the biggest concern that people's come here today. It's just that most of the audiences are under F1, and they wonder if this is going to become a norm or something that could happen again in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can happen in the future, given that the government is stating they're developing this policy. So until such a policy is issued, the SEVIS records for the students will remain active. It does seem like they're still considering terminating the SEVIS record, but just under maybe some more clear standard. That's what I might take away from the government statement. I don't know what David thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're going to do is likely because just to back up for a second, the majority of SEVIS termination reasons are initiated by the school. Okay. So 95% of these, any terminations are going to be initiated by the designated school officer at the immigration office at the school. Only very rare circumstances is ICE allowed to or does terminate up until the last few weeks. What I think the new policy is going to be is to sort of use the power of ICE in accrediting all these F-1 students in these schools and putting pressure on the designated school officers and forcing them to maybe do ICE's dirty work and figure out some new ways to force them to use their power because they have the power. ICE doesn't have the power. ICE will force them to maybe terminate on different reasons and different grounds. So I think that would be a lot more difficult for us to challenge because ultimately it would be the school using their established authority, even if it is at the behest of ICE. So, I think that might happen. And now that we're seeing what they're doing in terms of using AI to identify certain markers, I don't know that they're going to maybe target people from certain majors, certain schools, that type of stuff. I mean, it's a scary time, but at the same time, we are here as lawyers to hold them to the law. They can't just go out and do these types of mass terminations without any authority, without any reasons, without expecting us to challenge it. And while litigation is very expensive, everybody benefits from it because as we're seeing here in this particular fight, we're resolving that positively. And if they try to do something else illegal, well, guess what? We're here. We've got our pencils sharpened and we're ready to go again. So that's all I can say is, we can't predict the future, but just realize that you guys aren't here. You don't have to go through it alone. You have partners out there to work with to hopefully set the record straight and continue on with your studies and reaching your hopeful American dream.
Mhm. And then I wanted to quickly switch into our next topic, which we have, based on our information, we have put together some of the burning questions that our audiences might want to ask. I see some live questions coming in from our audiences. Those are all great. We will address those questions probably 5-10 minutes later in our second half. And then meanwhile, our audiences, if you do have a question specifically, that you have concerns about, feel free to ask the questions. We have two immigration attorneys live with us. Hopefully, they could address your questions and address your concerns. But David, also to your point, I think we were talking about consequences, and then just give us, Marta and David, just give us a brief introduction for everybody. What does SEVIS termination mean, and what is the consequences for F1 student if somebody encounters SEVIS termination in the future?
Yeah, I can start. So SEVIS is the system that the government uses to manage all these F and J students' status within the U.S. So that was a system developed after the 911. If someone's SEVIS is terminated, the student loses status immediately. So if the person has no status, he can be subject to deportation, and the person cannot change into another status lawfully. That's what happened in the recent cases. A student got selected in H-1B, let's say this year, but then all of a sudden they loses their F-1 status due to the SEVIS termination. So they're asking, can I still get my H-1B within the US? No, if they cannot have their status restored, they won't be able to change status. So that would mean a big problem for a lot of students if they lose the status immediately after the SEVIS termination.
And then
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly how I always understood it until the government started making up arguments in court a couple of weeks ago saying that a SEVIS termination is completely unrelated to your status. So, in fact, like Marta was saying, there was somebody who got a request for evidence in connection with a change of status petition. So this person was trying to change from F-1 to H-1B, and USCIS, which is the different government agency that handles those benefit requests, issued a notice of intent to deny saying, well, since you were terminated in SEVIS, you don't have valid F-1 status. You're not eligible to change status. And they brought the lawyers who were litigating these SEVIS terminations brought that notice to court and said, this is what USCIS is saying. And then ICE, who runs SEVIS, saying, oh, well, USCIS is wrong. SEVIS termination doesn't have any effect on somebody's underlying immigration status. So it's a complete mess. Even these agencies who are all within the Department of Homeland Security, they can't even agree on what a SEVIS termination is. So right now, I mean, I'm taking the position that we just need to take them at their word that a SEVIS termination's not doesn't mean that you're out of status, but it's kind of a moot point now that they've restored all those. But, it's certainly an argument that I'm saving away for the future if they do try to bring that up in connection with the change of status or a green card application.
Absolutely. And then to David's point, this is a wonderful case that demonstrate that how difficult the current situation, the previous case situation was. I wanted also to ask Marta about the cases that you encountered in Los Angeles specifically. What kind of patterns and what kind of cases did you deal with students SEVIS being terminated?
I would say that that's pretty much in line with the how the other students experience it. A lot of them were arrested, no charge was brought up, but all of a sudden they found out their SEVIS was terminated. I think it's most difficult for students who were at certain stage. Let's say someone who's about to graduate.
Yeah.
Because it's already April, right? A lot of the graduation takes place in May or maybe some in June. So that's the graduation season. And we know for a lot of the international students, they need to apply for the OPT around this time. So all of a sudden, their SEVIS is terminated. They won't be able to file for the OPT, and then they can lose at least 1 year, or for some, it can be 3 years of very precious training period within the US, the work authorization. So that was really a big disaster for a lot of the students at this stage. And also, we know a lot of the students, they are doing some on-campus work, like say they are TAs, they're RAs. So because of the SEVIS termination, all of a sudden, these on-campus employment authorization were lost as well. So that would affect a lot of the students' ability to, live and work and study in the US. So that was also affecting a lot of them as well. So we do find, like maybe for some students, they're lucky they can still continue the study if their school allows them to do. But for a lot of those students in this period, and also those students who are at the end of their 12 months OPT, at the time to renew their OPT, then they cannot apply for the STEM OPT because their school DSO cannot issue the STEM I-20 for them, right? So that's also affecting them, and that problem was there to be solved immediately because the clock was ticking for them.
And then to follow up with both of you guys on the previous point, I think we touched on students that, for example, they have previously have SEVIS terminations in the previous 2 weeks, and now they have their SEVIS termination reversed, now meaning that they have their SEVIS back. But what if they are under a tight timeline with some application? For example, they're in the middle of H-1B application, or even Marta, as you mentioned, STEM OPT application that is approaching deadline. For example, in the very extreme cases, where I had my F1 CVIS terminated 2 weeks ago. Now I got my F1 CVIS back from the school, but I'm not eligible to apply for STEM OPT anymore because my deadline has passed. What would that happen to those students?
Wow, that would be a really bad situation for the student. I would think, for the student caught in that kind of situation, they really should pursue litigation
Yeah.
to preserve their right to apply for their, whatever status they want to pursue. But for a lot of students, luckily, because they do have like a window. So for example, for the H-1B, they have the window until the end of June. So most of them are not affected by, like, say, I think that lasted for a few weeks, like 2 weeks also, right? The SEVIS termination. And for a lot of others who are at the time to apply for OPT or STEM OPT, because of, the window, they have like this 90-day window, right? And they have another 60-day after graduation. So luckily for a lot of them, it doesn't get to the point that a lot of students are ineligible to apply for OPT.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
and there
think,
are yeah, yeah, and there are
go
other
ahead.
situations too. Like let's say that somebody was on because you have 90 days of unemployment time on OPT, right? Well, let's say that my CVIS was terminated and I was on day 80 and I was just about to find a job. Now my thing has been restored, but it's 2 weeks later, so I'm now on day 94, 95. So am I out of status now? I mean, do I am I going to be penalized for those 2 weeks where my CVIS was terminated? These, like Marta said, these are situations if they're one-offs or really specific hardships that you're getting, that you're experiencing as a result of this SEVIS termination, there's really no way to fix it. Those are the types of cases that need to be litigated because you can get a settlement from the government that specifically does protect your status and allows you sort of to go back to the way things were before, for the status quo.
Thank you so much for both attorneys' wonderful insights. I wanted to add one last question to our current focus topics, and then we'll move on to our live Q&A part of the session. So I think both of you mentioned that as the new policy shaped up, there might be some changes, and we might anticipate some new trends going on with what DHS or the other government parties will be doing. So for those of us who is attending today's session who had an F1 status or even other status, oh, I think strictly F1 speaking for now, should they especially be cautious? Should they, pay special attention to some areas in order to prevent themselves to getting into similar situations to better protect their F1 status?
I mean, this is really hard to advise on because the people who are affected by the SEVIS terminations in the first place, they did nothing wrong anyway. So it was all by a big government error. I mean, what's next? Are they going to target everybody who has brown eyes and terminate them on that basis? So make sure you wear different color contact lenses. I mean, it's really, really hard to anticipate the next government error, right? So, I mean, the advice is going to be the same advice that I give all the time, which is just make sure that you are enrolled in a full course of study, you're making good progress towards it, you're meeting all the requirements of F1 status. And like I speak on these day one CBT webinars, make sure that you have good documentation so that if you are questioned about any aspect of your status maintenance, then you'll be able to whip out a whole packet of documents to prove that you were doing exactly what was required under the F1 laws. But other than that, and other than just being particularly vigilant about that, given that this is government error and we can anticipate that the Trump administration is going to do another overreach, it's probably going to be erroneous. All you can really do is just focus very much on what you're doing and have a good immigration lawyer available and your contacts to contact if needed.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. As David said, these students did nothing wrong. Even though some of them may have a record of being arrested or charged. But again, like the SEVIS termination was not their fault. It was government error. So they did nothing wrong. But I understand for a lot of the students, they want to do some precautionary steps, take some precautionary steps. I do notice for a lot of students, something they can do is making sure you do report information timely, like as you can, because if I remember correctly, during the first Trump administration, at some point, the ICE started sending out notice to some students if they know, like they notice like the student hasn't reported the employer timely and they
The
accrued
OPT
certain,
funds.
yeah,
Yeah.
like more than 90 days of unemployment, right? So they started sending out these notice to students like about termination. I remember that's what happened during the first Trump administration. Something else the students can consider is make sure you do report your address change. So when the government sends out something, you can receive it. But other than that, as David said, just focusing on documentation and do whatever you can and make sure you follow these news closely and you know what's happening like right now in the trend.
Thank you both so much. I do wanted to add a quick note to everybody who's attending today's session or be watching the recording. This session, we do not offer any types of legal advice to anybody. So this is for education purposes only. So if you do have like a specific case you wanted to discuss, both David and Marta are open for more work in terms of consultation or other legal services. So feel free to contact them. You can reach out to us and to get their contact information as well. And we do wanted to go to live questions. So everybody in the audience, if you do have a questions that is burning, that you wanted to get that addressed, this is your chance. And then we did collected tens or 20s of questions from our live audiences today. We want to get to them first. So the best way to answer the question quickly is actually you can upvote other people's questions so that we understand the priority of your questions, because I see the questions are coming in. So right now I'm just gonna go by order, but feel free to add your questions as you please. All right, let's go to the first question is from Junaid. So would both of you recommend traveling outside of the country right now? I think we talked about this project topics before, and we're going to keep talking about these topics because now is a time that people are started asking those questions. People are worried about these questions. So especially when you will need a renewal for F-1 visa. So needing renewal for F-1 travel internationally, what are your opinions?
I
Well,
would, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, so at least for me, I don't recommend these students travel right now just because there are a lot of things unexpected happening. Say, for example, during the SEVIS termination, for those who were outside the US, all of a sudden they found themselves can like not able to coming back to the US because their SEVIS was terminated, their visa was revoked, right? So for those students to come back, it would be more challenging, than those who are in the U.S. For those in the U.S., as soon as their SEVIS is restored, they can go back to school, they can resume the work. But for those who are stuck overseas, they have to apply for the F-1 students, like for the F-1 visa, which they may or may not get.
Yeah, I just want to add two different things. Number one is that all the SEVIS reactivations that we've been seeing, that's all done by the Department of Homeland Security. It's completely unrelated to visa revocations. That's handled by the Department of State. That was not litigated in any of these cases. So what you're seeing is that these students are all getting their SEVIS records reactivated, but their visas are still revoked. Okay. So that's very important to note. Number two is that a visa, once you're in the United States, the visa validity is really mostly irrelevant because a visa is an entry document generally, okay? You only need a valid visa when you're seeking entry to the United States. Once you are in the United States, your status is controlled by being a duration of status and it's generally controlled by having an active SEVIS record. So those folks who have their SEVIS records reactivated, they are back in F-1 status, but your visa is still revoked. And if you travel outside the US, you're going to need to apply for a new visa. And like Marta said, that's going to be very difficult for a host of reasons because of that revocation, but also layer that on to the general troubles that people are having under the Trump administration. And then layer on top of that, the fact that some folks, especially if they're later on in their careers and their academic careers, it's been years and years before they've been home, it's going to be harder to show ties to the home country. So many risks in traveling right now. But the good news is that if you're here and you have an active SEVIS record, you don't need to travel. You can go about your day without having a valid visa.
Great point. All right, let's move on to, we're gonna go to the most high upvoted questions. So if you do see your questions in the audiences, you feel free to upvote them. So next one, do both of you guys think those kind of SEVIS termination will happen to students on day one CPT? A lot of our audiences are in the day one CPT background or wanting to get into CPT. So this will mean dearly to them. I know that nobody could actually predict anything to happen like that, but let us understand more about, share more insights on like legitimately, like according to the rules, how could this happen? And if it will happen, what's your take on this situation? I'm gonna go with Marta first for this time, and then David, you can jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think like the SEVIS termination was targeting any particular group of F1 student, OPT student is targeted or CPT students targeted. No, the SEVIS termination was due to, maybe something related to the criminal record. Regardless, what stage of F1 status you're in, you can be affected. So at least the last SEVIS termination had nothing to do with CPT. But we do notice that, the student status maintenance is an issue the current administration is definitely scrutinizing, but maybe not through SEVIS termination, but they can do that when they are adjudicating H-1B. When the student is changing status from F-1 into H-1B or maybe another status, that's when they would probably require more documentation. So that's the trend I'm seeing.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've already seen them use AI to target certain groups, right? So could they run an AI and be like, I'm targeting everybody at Westcliff and everybody at Harrisburg, everybody at Ottawa? Sure, they can do that. I don't think they will for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Trump administration seems to, it's kind of weird, but you can sort of see a method to their madness. They seem to be more angry at like the Ivy League type universities, Harvard, like they're going to battle with Harvard right now. They're not going to battle right now with Harrisburg or Westcliff or any of those others because they don't really, it's not on their radar. They don't really seem to care. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, like Marta said, if they're going to do this and they're going to crack down on day one CPT, it's probably not going to be through something like SEVIS terminations. It's going to be either at the institutional level by making it more difficult for the schools to maintain their SEVIS registration, or number two, like Marta said, in connection with these change of status and green card applications, really scrutinizing the people's immigration history to make sure that their use of day one CPT was valid.
Thank you. And I think I just want to repeat what David has said. The importance of keeping all your documentations while you're on day one CPT, just in case you run into any of these RFEs, you have a lot of things to count out.
Exactly.
All right, let's just move on to the next highest up votes. So this person are curious about my stand LPT report is late. Oh, this is the situations that Marta mentioned. For example, you have to report your stand LPT status and your employment. If that report is late because my DSO and employer both responded late. But I did my due diligence. I finished all of my parts. But how USCIS see this? If I submitted my late report, how would this turn out to be?
Do you want me to answer or do you want Marta to answer?
You can go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is your SEVIS record active. That's number one thing. So if it is active, then I really wouldn't worry too much because USCIS does not traditionally ask for that type of stuff. Okay, that's usually between you and the school. Now, that's not to say that the Trump administration, because they do have the authority to do this, is going to start requiring students to share more documents that they share with the school now to share with immigration. Like, for example, that 983 training plan. Traditionally, that's something you turn into your school to get the STEM OPT I-20. USCIS rarely, if ever, requests that or sees it. Now they can start asking for that, but that's going to be a trend that we're going to be aware of. So, in my opinion, if your SEVIS record is active and you have a record of doing your due diligence, like you said, then I think you'd probably be okay going forward.
Right. What do you think, Marta? I do believe that stand OPT, if the person is talking about the report that you have to update, your employment information, that has a do have a specific deadline. So, what's your take on this? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I agree with David. Traditionally, USCIS doesn't really take issues with those. So when USCIS is adjudicating, like say a change of status request, they care more about the unemployment time, whether the student accrued like more than 90 days of unemployment time or 150 days of unemployment time. That's what USCIS cares most. But personally, I am a little concerned about the current administration, whether they would use these very technical violation as a reason to, maybe accuse the student of violating their status or not. That's my concern that the USCIS hasn't been doing that yet. I'm also wondering what David thinks, about those. Because I do get a lot of inquiries from students who are concerned about, maybe making a report late. Because technically, they're supposed to report within not 10 days, right? Like for those employment change or address change. What if they're late? So far, I don't think USCIS has been taking issues with that, but I don't know, like what we should anticipate going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's so many technicalities. I mean, you're supposed to report a change of address. I know lots of students don't do that
Right.
diligently. I mean, technically, could Trump go in and start terminating people for not updating their address? Sure, they could do that. They could do the same thing with not timely reporting. But I think currently, when USCIS is adjudicating these things, they just look at whether the SEVIS is active, and that's generally going to be okay. So if the failure to report on time is not resulting in your SEVIS being terminated, I think for the time being, you're fine. If you're later denied or they're issuing you an intent to deny because of something that you really had no control over and you end up getting denied, then that's a case for litigation.
For sure. Next one. This one is actually somebody sharing her own case. I'm currently applying for an F2 to F1, and then she wanted to understand, will these kind of changes status cases be targeted? And then she also shared an incident where people on LinkedIn are messaging them as law enforcement. So from my perspective, I don't know what you think, but I wouldn't trust people on LinkedIn, because if law enforcement is gonna come to you, they're gonna come to you officially. So, but please do share your take on change status in this current situations.
Well,
You
I
you can
mean,
go ahead, David, and then Marta, you can share your opinion. Thanks.
okay, I mean, F2 to F1, I mean, that's not going to be falling within all the situation we've been discussing. This is somebody who's going to have an active SEVIS record. They're going to be issued an I-20 from the school, and they'll apply to change status. Same showings that you always have to make, ties to your home country. You're going to have to show adequate finances, all that stuff. I do those kinds of cases all the time. I haven't necessarily seen any higher levels of scrutiny than even under the Biden administration. So I would expect that to be a relatively routine case. We can certainly help out with that if you're concerned. We do those cases all the time. As far as the LinkedIn thing, I mean, there's so many scams going on right now. I mean, it's just unbelievable. People are getting text messages, they're getting LinkedIn messages. I generally advise that you presume it's a scam unless they provide you with a specific card. And if they provide you with a card, then you can either contact an attorney or just contact them and verify that it's actually them. Get their official card, ID, all that type of stuff. But you're generally not going to have somebody from the government contacting you from LinkedIn. So if it seems dubious, it generally is dubious, and you should take the seriousness accordingly.
Yeah. To add to what David said, like I agree. Like usually, F2 to F1 is pretty straightforward, change of status request. However, I do want to caution our students, like do expect USCIS to look at your social media, like say LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah.
For example, someone who was in F2 status is not supposed to work, right? But if you list all kinds of work experience on LinkedIn during that same time, you might get into
Yeah,
trouble, right? So
exactly.
that may be something you should consider. But other than that, I agree. I don't think law enforcement would reach out to you on LinkedIn. That's not how they do things.
Right. One of the cases, that is a very insightful point. One of the cases I see from some of the students around us is that they share some of the stories with their classmates, was people that go into their universities, that they were stopped at the custom border when they were trying to enter the US. People are not checking their bank statement, but they're getting information from their social media chat. For example, if you have like a WhatsApp or like a WeChat for Chinese students, they're checking your WeChat, your WhatsApp to see if you have transaction histories. And then that defines if you have, they will presume that they will take a look. And then if they think that is closer to what they think would be in a long, unlawful employment, they will actually, treat it very seriously. So this is something that I do advise other students to pay attention into your social media. And then I think we are approaching to the end of today's session. I do recognize we have lots of new questions coming in, but I want to thank everybody for coming in. Especially, I want to thank David and Marta for coming in to sharing your wonderful insight. Me personally, I also learned a lot from today's session in terms of what have happened, and also a sense of assurance, that students are actually getting their SEVIS back. That is a good sign. But whether or not this will happen in the future, we're not sure about that. So if, for example, if USC or if the current government issued another statement regarding how this situation went, or how this situation will evolve into, we're definitely happy to invite you guys back again to do another updated session for us. Because, for example, one of the example you mentioned is that some of the students' F-1 visa are currently revoked. So if, for example, if they got their F-1 visa for a couple of years, now they don't have their visa, they wanted to travel for urgency, but they could not. So this also is one of the issues that students care about. But anyways, I do want to thank both of you guys for coming in to sharing your expertise. I want to thank everybody for coming in, and in this difficult time. And we here in Go Elite, we wanted to support everybody with the best information as we could. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ryan, for putting this
Thank you,
together.
Ryan.
Thank you.
All right, stay strong, everybody. All right, take care.
The recordings will be available in Go Elite's YouTube channel. So we will also send that your way. So in case you miss any of today's insightful sessions, definitely feel free to revisit the session. Hopefully I will see you guys soon in our next session. All right. Thank you guys for attending. Thank you, David. Thank you, Marta, again. And I'll see you guys soon.
Definitely. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a
Bye.
great night.